maybe I could just plainly and straightly ask you to tell this story, what hit me really kind of in a sweet spot regarding Plato's analogy of cave. So, for example, for 11 years, I'm working with this topic, what is like one of the root topics of society as a problem is people are not engaged in their works. They don't feel motivated. So people are not having their works where they can fulfill their potential. So we have this global pandemic of unmotivated people who are like harming themselves and society and workplace, something like that. So this analogy of Plato's is such a wonderful thing, and maybe we could just start and you could tell this story what Plato generated many thousands of years ago.
Okay, we can start by that. Plato, 2,400 years ago, something like that, in his book Republic, he mentioned the story, and perhaps you can start with the first image that we have for this. That was saying that there was this group of prisoners, and their backs were against the wall, and they were looking to shadows. These shadows were actually produced by another group of people that were passing by. The thing was that these prisoners were thinking that these shadows were the reality. It was the reality for them. They spent lots of time looking to the shadows, so they didn't got any input and additional input. So basically they thought that this was the reality for them. And the second slide, please. Then there is one prisoner that somehow manages to escape, and he or she goes behind the fire that is projecting the shadows and finds a way out from the cave. Actually, it is the moment that he or she understands that there is a cave, that they were in a cave. And well, simply and plain as that, he sees the sun, the light. It hurts to see the sun and the light, and to understand that the reality was not the shadows that they were living and immersed in their own lives. And the other slide, please. So basically, this prisoner faces this urge to return and tell the others, and he really makes he or she makes a really effort, a big effort to explain to the others that that was not the reality. That was not there were more things to know, and they were in a cave. But the prisoners didn't believe him at first. But after some insistence, the prisoners basically rejected him, and well, as we can understand by Plato's story, this person was killed by the other prisoners, because he or she was announcing a reality that was untruth to the others. Yeah, so that's the story. We can start from that. Now from that we can make a lot of conclusions and questions that could lead us in this conversation. So yeah, that is the story.
Okay, from maybe origins of this story for you, what emotionally kind of attached you to this story? From my perspective, this is always the question about looking beyond your traditions and creating next steps, but is like, again, next traditions, right? Just to be in the movement towards more humanity, more kindness, more intellectual openness and something like that. What that was for me. What hit you most emotionally when you heard this story first?
Yeah, well, the meaning of this story had different meanings in certain different moments in my life. Recently, it is very meaningful because it helps me to understand what is happening to me in terms of knowledge. It helps me to understand that I will be always limited in terms of understanding reality. It helps me to understand that I will be always inside some cave. Even if I get out one cave, I will be inside another one.
You will move from one illusion to next illusion to lesser illusion, but still illusion, right?
Yes, a limited reality, I would say, a limited reality.
Mm-hmm.
And well, that helps us to think a lot about the world today, the way that we live in the world, the way that we look in the world, the way that we are immersed in the realities that the world proposes us, the way that the reality that we see is prescribed or not, if it is reflected, if it is what is the ownership that we have in the reality that we experience. So it helps us to think about that. That's for me the main tool, the main meaningfulness of this allegory of the cave as a tool. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I suppose you have talked with a lot of people with this analogy. And what is the main reaction, what you get from people? What is like their main insights or takeaways?
Well, in my experience, people enjoy to understand. It's always good to have things explained in a simple way. And when we cannot understand in a simple way what is happening to us, the different phenomena that are happening to us. So it's this allegory helps to understand that. So it's they enjoy. What happens afterwards, I'm not sure, because one thing is to enjoy the metaphor, another thing is to think about the metaphor. And thinking about this metaphor, if we use it to think about the world, is not an easy task, because it implies, I would say, for us to cut some relations with the shadows that we are looking for, to being distant and critical regarding to those shadows that we are looking for in the reality. So this is a different process. One thing is to enjoy the metaphor. Another thing is what we do with the metaphor.
Okay. You know, this question sounded, I suppose, some kind of strange that I'm asking what people are taking away, because usually we are all unique, right? We take away a lot of aspects of and nuances and details because we have unique gene settings and so on, so on, so on. The thing is, though, is like I have this marketing / anthropology approach to things. So what we can understand, what kind of trends do we have in society? So maybe you have noticed some trends, because in terms of shadows or something like that, it kind of one of the spiritual perceptions of reality or philosophical perception of reality. And I don't know, some portion of society could say that I don't understand what the bullshit you are talking about. Sorry for my French, you know. And therefore, I'm asking what you see as a main insights, what your audiences have perceived.
Yeah. Okay, so I make a parallel between Plato's cave and Paulus Freire conception when he tries to, theorize what he calls the pedagogy of the oppressed. He says that people are immersed in some certain reality. They are immersed, so they don't necessarily have a developed critical sense of what they are experiencing as reality. And in order to get out of that, they need a certain process. To that process, Paulo Freire calls education. Okay? And that's why education might be an important tool in order for us to understand reality. And the process is not easy, because it always implies a certain kind of self-transformation. Because we live in an oppressing reality, as Paul Freire says. So our cave is oppressing somehow, because there are people with the different props making the shadows. Okay, so we are having some kind of a prescribed reality. We are doing not exactly what we want, but we are doing what we are being told to do.
And can we say this is like the principle of traditions? So the culture, this is just a culture of established biases, established stereotypes, established behaviors, not particularly good or bad, just established, right?
Yes, we can say that culture is one thing. I normally prefer to use a complicated word. I normally use the hegemony. So there are different hegemonies that concur in the apparatus that create what we are. Hegemonies, they include, for example, patriarchy. Let's say the power that the men traditionally, as you say, have in the world since we know from history. So because there is power, an asymmetric power between men and women end up what we say structurally discriminated or structurally excluded or structural victims of violence. But the fact that we are calling it as a structural problem, we are taking out the possibility of transforming that problem. And by saying that, we are assuming that both patriarchy problems are structural, but also the idea, we are denying the idea of transforming it. And basically what we are saying is that, hey, you are on this cave, but the cave will not change. So what you need to do is to stay in the cave and to deal with it. Patriarchy will never cease to exist. This happens to racism. This happens to social inequality. This happens to many phenomena that we see as impossible to change. So this is my take or at least the beginning of my take on Plato's cave. It helps me to understand that the problems that I'm being convinced that are structural, they are part of a cave. And if we manage to get out of the cave, we manage also to start imagining solutions and other possibilities and alternative narratives and so on and so forth.
Okay, so let's look at some solutions. I suppose you have been asked about solutions, and what are the those ways when we move from one cave to other cave, right? What are the impulses? What creates that? Because for me, the main word would be homeostasis, right? So we are looking for this homeostasis, and we want stability. Our brains are wired like that. We want stability. We want comfort, social conformity, right? This is like a huge part of the social conformity, to be afraid to be excluded. So what, for your perspective, would be, for example, right now in this humanity, with this educational system globally, usually kind of unified and similar, what are the impulses? What changes situations? What helps those guys who tell others about the sun and outside of the cave not to be killed, but listen to, and maybe this tribe moves to another cave? What are the impulses?
Yeah, well, I do believe that whatever is the solution comes in a collective process. This is one thing that I assume. It doesn't mean that it doesn't involve many individual processes, as you were saying in the beginning, so that I can reconcile with the lack of knowledge that I have of reality, so that I can, from that, I can build up, I can develop my critical thinking. But whatever happens, Paul Freire as well, he mentions that the solution could be an educational process. But this educational process is not the educational process that we currently have, and that we are, universalizing and globalizing. It is, how to say, one of the biggest achievements from liberal democracies is the fact that we were able to expand the network of education. More people in the world are accessing education than any time in history. This is a great achievement. Now, if we want to look to what kind of the education that is being provided, that's a different thing. And that is what I would say, what we need to think about. The education that we are getting is not the education that is preparing people to get out of the cave. Let me use the metaphor. The education that we are getting is the education that is preparing people to stay in the cave. Okay? And that's problematic, because if we, in the moment that we are right now, have more, it is more easy to us right now to imagine a third world war or a nuclear Armageddon, we do have a problem with our cave. If for us it's easier to imagine, as Zizek said, to imagine the end of the world because of capitalism, than to imagine the end of capitalism, we do have a problem with our cave. So we need to get out of the cave. And the collective process to get out of the cave could be education. And that's what I called radical education. Radical education is a process that not only helps us to think about the cave where we are, to think critically about the things that in our education in the education that exists, we normally see it as stable. The stable phenomena that we look to education, such as economy, capitalism, democratic systems, the division west and east, the division north and south, inequalities, all the phenomena that we understand as structural and impossible to transform, all these we need to question. We need to create the space for collective questioning of that. And if this is done by children and young people, I think it's even better. I believe more in the capacity of children and young people to create alternatives and to imagine other democratic possibilities than I do believe in adults established somehow in the cave.